Hello everyone and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalists, episode 20. I'm Mark Moncrief from the Melbourne Traditionalists and I have with me David Hiscock from XYZ. How are you, David?
Yeah, very good, Mark. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you. You've made me a writer instead of a guest on XYZ. I appreciate that.
Yeah, you've been doing some good quality stuff and I just like the idea of bringing everybody together into bigger and bigger platforms.
There's an article, not by me, but by another guy, Mike Crusade on XYZ.
My crusade.
Crusade, all right. What can we do today? And that was published on the 6th of December.
Yes.
And that is a fantastic article.
It's a brilliant one. Yeah.
With some practical advice and some inspirational advice, which means it might not be practical now, but it may be practical in 6 months or a year or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah. I like the idea. Well, obviously we need to have a plan of how we're going to take back the culture, take back our countries.
Yeah.
And you have your plan of what you're going to do today. You have your plan of what you're going to do this week, the next couple of months, and where you see yourself in. We need 5-year plans as well.
Yeah, I think we do.
Yeah, I especially love because his article "What Can You Do Today" by Mike Crusade on the XYZ. The best bit was his list of things of what not to do.
Yes.
Yeah, it's my favourite bit. It's I'm going through them and I'm going okay, right.
So I'll try and remember to put this underneath the podcast.
Yeah, great.
So people can have a direct link to it.
Okay.
Now today we're going to be talking about, we talked about this off air. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a social event and I was put on the spot. I was asked, what's my 5 favourite movies? And so I came up with a list. And so today we're going to talk about my 5 favourite movies.
Brilliant.
And I'm not going to keep people in suspense. I'm going to tell you what they are right at the start because I'm not putting these in any order. Whichever one I watched last is my favourite, all right? But these are my top 5. One is a movie called The Last Valley, which practically nobody has heard of, so we'll talk about that more. Second, Troy.
Great movie.
And then third, fourth, fifth are the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah, excellent choice.
All right. So we'll now go a bit more into each movie. Starting with The Last Valley. The Last Valley was made in 1970, so the year I was born. Cost $11 million in 1970 money, so that's probably $100 million now. It was the American Broadcasting Corporation, ABC, were trying to get into movies, and this was their blockbuster, or as they call it now, tentpole movie. And it was a massive flop. It made about $2 million. So it just went into obscurity. Now, what's amazing about it is that the movie stars Omar Sharif, stars Michael Caine, Brian Blessed. So there's a lot of people in it who are quite well known.
They got the big names in for it.
Exactly. And they filmed it on location in the Austrian Alps.
Yeah, I'm looking at I saw some of the pictures before. It looks spectacular.
It is spectacular. It's based on a book called The Fat Valley, and it's set during the 30 Years War. So there's only 2 movies in English set during the 30 Years War, and one was made in 1933. Right, Queen Christina, and this is the next one, The Last Valley.
Can you just remind us when was the 30 Years War?
The 30 Years War was from 1618 to 1648, and it started off as a civil war in the Kingdom of Bohemia, which is now the Czech Republic, and then it became a regional war, and then because one side was predominantly Protestant and the other side was predominantly Catholic, it became a religious war. And then halfway through the war, so early 1630s, France, the largest Catholic country, or the most powerful Catholic country in Europe at that time, sided with the Protestants. So the war, nobody had the power to actually win the war, so the war just dragged on and on and on. finally ended in 1648 with the Treaty of Westphalia, which is actually quite a famous treaty.
Yes.
And that did two things. It legitimised officially the nation state.
Yes.
And secondly, it introduced the diplomatic system that we now understand, right? So permanent embassies, ambassadors have protection, the people who work for the embassy have protection, and so forth. Before then, it was a bit hit and miss.
Now, let me guess, at the time they said, "Oh, yeah, this system it'll ensure that there's never another war."
Yeah, they probably
they said, "Surely this time the war to end all wars." Yeah.
Although France and Spain continued to fight for another 11 years until 1659.
Well, that's understandable, the Spanish.
Yeah. So that's the situation that The Last Valley is set in. And in Germany, where the movie is set, 30% of the population died.
Whoa.
So for every 100 people alive in Germany in 1618, there were 70 alive in 1648.
Okay.
So it was a truly devastating war.
Yes.
The Last Valley starts off with Omar Sharif's character. Now, Omar Sharif is an Egyptian. In the movie, he plays a character who was born in Magdeburg, Germany, right? And he does not look like someone who was born in Magdeburg, Germany.
He probably does now.
Yeah, he's dead now, which I think is your point. But he plays a great part, right? If you ignore how out of place he looks, the acting is really good. And he plays a character called Vogel, who's a scholar, and he's basically trying to escape from the war. He's just had too much of it, and he's just desperate to find anywhere where he can get away. And then he stumbles into the valley, the last valley untouched by the war. But as he finds it, it's also found by a unit of mercenaries who are out foraging for their army, basically plundering.
Yes. Yeah, foraging is, we mean that very loosely. In the same way that firing artillery, we just call that shelling.
That's right, yes. And the commander, the captain of the unit, that's his name, the captain, is played by Michael Caine. And Michael Caine is brilliant. He looks like a mercenary commander. He talks like it. He acts like it. It's brilliant. You know, he's totally lost in the role. And unlike Omar Sharif, who's a great actor, he actually looks like he should be there.
Okay.
Right? And the whole movie revolves around a conversation that the two of them have. And Vogel says, have you ever seen a valley like this? In years, have you seen a valley like this? Stay here. Winter here in the valley. Live while your army dies. And the captain says, yeah, all right. And that's what the movie's about. The movie is about a refugee, a group of mercenaries who stay in this valley for the winter. And there are two other major characters. There's the mayor, Gruber, and there's the priest. And it's really, the movie, while it has battles in it, there's 3 battles. One of them's a massacre, not really a battle.
Yeah.
It's really about the relationship between these 4 men. And in that sense, it's a political movie. And because none of them actually want to be in this situation. All of them want to be masters of their own destiny, and none of them are.
Yeah.
And every one of them's walking a tightrope, right? Because if the others turn against them, then they don't stand a chance. And that's what makes the movie so great. And it's why it failed at the box office. Because it's a relationship movie, not between a man and a woman, which 99% of relationship movies are. It's a relationship movie about 4 masculine men trying to survive in a situation where most people don't.
Right. Just on that topic, that reminds me of why I love The Great Escape and The Enemy Below.
Yeah.
and also The Hunt for Red October.
All right.
Because in those movies, the casts are almost entirely men.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
it's what you described there. And it's about how they all just work together or fight against each other. So in this movie, The Last Valley, does this pristine valley and this untouched town,
Yep.
Does it basically just get desecrated over the course of the movie? Does it?
I'm not going to give a spoiler like that.
Okay.
I'm going to let, if people want to watch it, they should watch it.
Okay.
And because it's interesting to follow what happens and why things happen and why things don't happen.
Right.
You know, when I was thinking about this movie, I thought, I've probably seen this movie 30 times.
Yes.
And then I thought to myself, I first saw the movie on late night television
30 times.
in the very early 1990s. So 1990, 91, 92, somewhere in that period. And then I thought to myself, hey, it's nearly 30 years later. That means I've only watched it once a year. No, that can't be true. I must have watched this movie at least 60 times.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, okay.
So I've watched it a lot.
Yes.
There are some...
So did you find it just by accident?
I did. I found it just by accident.
I love those kinds of stories.
Yeah, the same way I found This is Spinal Tap. Roughly around the same time, and again, late night TV.
Being a musician, there was no way I was going to get away from it.
Every musician has said to me, Spinal Tap is not a comedy.
That's so true. Yes. So on this Last Valley, I find it really interesting the way that you've set this up, because if we're talking about planning, a lot of the discussion on the right is about how do we deal with what we know is coming.
Yeah.
When we look at the way that we're seeing a geopolitical shift at the moment, we're seeing the rise of China, the decline of America. We know what happens when basically you have the rise of a new power and the decline of an old.
Yep.
There's war.
Yep.
So we see war coming up very soon. As David Hilton's talked about today, Australia has been the lucky country because we are the ethnic brothers of the last two greatest empires the world has seen. That's why.
That's right.
We have been successful because we are white British Christian, and we have been lucky that white British Christians have been the most powerful people in the world.
Yep.
So that's about to change, and our country has been flooded by people from the new rising empire, and our governments seem to be essentially subservient to this new rising empire. There are at least that they have multiple allegiances or other allegiances other than to the people, and so we're like, what are we going to do? So one of the discussions of that is basically we need to form our own little areas. Yep. Where we all look after ourselves. We need to find our own valley. We need to find our Gulch. We need to make our little Rivendell, basically, or the Shire. Yeah. But eventually the orcs make their way over there. Eventually an army is going to make its way over there. If you can, you might think you can drive 5 hours to a country town, and that's a long way away. They'll never make it there. But it's 5 hours away.
I met up with a guy who came from a small country town.
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh, you should come to my country town."
Yeah.
But he just told me about his Taiwanese wife and how the pharmacy was controlled by Asians.
Yeah.
So even in this tiny country town,
yep,
there's no escaping it.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's the dilemma I think about, because I have people advising me, you've got to get out of Melbourne. It's going to become the zombie apocalypse, and it will. But eventually that zombie apocalypse is going to make its way to you.
I have always thought that white flight was a mistake. Always. Even when I read about the 50s and so forth, it's always a mistake.
Yes.
Because eventually you run out of places to run.
Yes.
And you've given up so much.
Yes.
If we'd actually stood our ground and fought back, would we be in this situation?
No. Well, I have friends. I know quite a few people from South Africa, and one of them says to me, "Oh, my father said to me, like we came from South Africa to here, because it was a white country. But 20 years later, Australia, we can see the signs of becoming South Africa in another 20 years' time."
Well, actually, I met with a very elderly guy, and he immigrated from Britain in 1960 to Australia.
Yeah.
And he came here because it was a white country.
Yeah. I think of somebody else I know. It's like Matty's Modern Life. Matty, he made a great comment the other day. Data is simply anecdotes multiplied. So we're hearing this from everybody, basically.
Exactly.
The people have come to Australia because they saw what was happening to their own countries, but eventually.
But ironically, it's not just white people.
Yeah.
All these Indians and Asians and so forth. They think Australia's white.
They come here.
White country.
Yes, that's
so they get here and they're like, "What's happened?"
Yeah.
I'm not the first one here.
Yeah, that's it. So yeah, I think that's it's. This movie sounds. The Lost Valley. It sounds like a great movie for a number of reasons. Like it's got that. Dynamic between like actual real men.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's a really good war movie, actually, like which shows war for what it is, which is like what we like. It's what we want with a war movie.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that sort of it really gets into the heart of like the dilemma of our age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's not a perfect movie. There are some flaws to it. There are a few things that come off a bit clunky. There's another character in the movie she was a Brazilian actress, and she looks Brazilian.
Okay.
And it doesn't make sense for her to be in 1600s Austria. There are some people who say it's a very anti-religious movie.
Right.
But there are others who say that it's actually a refinding of faith.
Yep.
So I guess it depends how you view it. It is. There are parts of it that are anti-religious,
mm-hmm.
but there are other parts where you can definitely say, "Hey, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect it to come back to God,
right,
and talk about God and man's place in the world." So it's a bit of a philosophical movie as well.
Right. Well, that is the thing about the church and God and Christianity. Like, it's still there even through all the death and destruction.
Yeah.
Mm.
Now, I'm going to leave the Lost Valley.
Yeah.
And go to Troy.
Okay, sure.
Now, Troy, made in 2004. It has a very sentimental reason for me. I saw it with my mother. We both went to the pictures and saw it, and we both loved it, and we watched it probably twice a year together. Right? But I've also watched it by myself, and it's just amazing.
Yeah.
Cost $175 million to make, and you can really see it.
Yes.
It looks fantastic. Every part of it looks fantastic. And there's not a miscasting at all. Everyone is cast perfectly.
On that note, the first few times I watched it, I didn't like that casting aspect because I thought that it looked like they'd just got the guys over from Braveheart and also the costumes from Braveheart and just given them all to the Greeks. But having watched a fair bit of Archaeologos now, understanding where those ancient races came from, I think it was actually quite well done. Yeah.
And Brad Pitt as Achilles, just amazing.
How good was he? He was so moody. He was so brooding, and just absolutely like it's like he fights and lives for himself, as much as he does for his people, and for the gods, and like he's completely his own man. It was an amazing Achilles in that.
And he looks like how you imagine Achilles would look.
Yes.
And he has that arrogance. If you've read the Iliad, I have read the Iliad. Uh-huh. It's Achilles is very arrogant,
right?
Very sure of himself,
uh-huh.
and Brad Pitt just brings that out fantastically.
Mm.
The other great performance is Eric Bana
Yes.
as Hector, and Hector is he truly comes across as a heroic figure, and we don't get enough of that.
Mm. Mm. Well, yeah. Again, it's war shown for what war is. It's men actually being men.
Yes.
The woman, the Australian actress Rose Byrne.
Yeah.
She's basically held as a captive, but
And she's great in it too.
She's great in it too. She's so feminine, and like it's a very feminine role.
Yes.
As well, and but at the same time, I think she falls in love with Achilles.
That's right.
Yeah.
She falls in love with Achilles.
So I love that, just that old school approach.
Yes.
is great. I love the battle scenes are epic. Like the battle where Achilles refuses to be involved, and so he's watching from on high, and he's like, "Move your army back. You're getting," because like the way that Troy's walls were basically concave.
Yes.
And so the general in charge of the army lets the army get into that, basically a killing zone.
Yes.
And Achilles can see it happening. He's like, "Why are you doing it?" It's just a great battle scene.
Yeah.
And then the scene where like he just stands like later on, like there's no army there. He stands in that sort of killing zone, and just keeps calling out Hector, and he just says it. He yells it, bellows it over and over and over and over again. Hector has no option but to come out.
But that's the thing, and Hector he's this. It shows that he's a great hero.
Yes.
Because he knows that he's going to his death.
Yes.
He knows that he can't beat Achilles, but he still goes.
Yes.
And that's his honour.
Yeah.
He won't despoil his honour. He goes out, he fights as good as he can, and he knows that it will result in his doom.
That's right. Yeah.
And then the effect it has on Achilles.
Yes.
How he realises that, hey, yeah, he had to kill him, but it has this great price for him.
Absolutely. Yes.
Now the movie's different to the Iliad. In the Iliad, the gods play a major role.
Mm-hmm.
The gods are they use the characters as playthings. We are but playthings to the gods.
Yes.
And they impersonate men
mm-hmm.
to create trouble,
mm-hmm.
to get glory for themselves. Mm-hmm. The gods are a very integral part of the Iliad.
Mm.
In Troy, they're absent.
Yes. They talk about
them. They talk about the gods. Mm-hmm. And actually, I think I actually like that. Normally I would want it to be true to the source, but it's not called the Iliad, it's called Troy.
Right, okay.
So I think you have to take it in that vein.
They wanted to tell the story of the Trojan War, and just that city. And concentrate
on the heroes of the war instead of being distracted by the gods, because it is quite distracting when you read it.
Right.
The heroes they're men, and here you have all these gods interfering with things, good and bad.
Well, it's a lot to put into one movie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The writing is amazing.
Apart from, there are a couple of moments early on in the movie where like Achilles' mother is talking to him and she's like, "Oh, they'll write about you for centuries to come." Like that just seemed a little bit put on. But yes, apart from that, yes, absolutely. Because it's...
You see, I think that sets up the scene.
Okay.
That shows that he has options.
Right.
And he chooses not to take them.
Okay. Yeah, okay, fair call.
Yeah.
Fair call. Yeah. But yeah, it's just a good war movie told without without all the nonsense that we have 20 years later as well.
Yeah. And what's interesting is it was filmed at the same time that the Iraq War was starting, and the director said, "Oh, this is an anti-war movie."
Really? What a douche!
Right? He goes, "Oh, this is our commentary on the Iraq War," and that's just nonsense. It's got nothing to do with Iraq.
Yeah.
There's no modern political thought in the movie at all. That's one of the great strengths of the movie. It's a timeless movie,
it was just
and it's set in its place. And as you pointed out, the masculine roles are very masculine and the feminine roles are very feminine, and they're very distinct. And that's not all. That's something that we miss in a lot of modern movies.
Yes.
Yeah, so they're the reasons that I really love Troy.
Yeah, great. How we're going for time, it could almost be worth talking about Lord of the Rings.
We are going to talk about Lord of the Rings.
Oh.
We're going to have a little bit of extra episode today.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll keep it.
So the three, so we'll move on to my third, fourth, fifth movies.
Yeah.
The three Lord of the Rings movies. This became a family tradition. Every Boxing Day, the new movie would be released, and we would go and see it on the day in gold class.
Yeah, good.
Because it's worthwhile. When you see a really great movie in gold class, it's fantastic. You know, I've gone and seen really mediocre movies in gold class, and it's a real disappointment.
Oh, okay.
But you see a top-notch movie like The Lord of the Rings, fantastic. Even The Hobbit was good in gold class.
I loved The Hobbits, yeah.
The Hobbits don't compare to the three Lord of the Rings movies. The thing I love about the Lord of the Rings movies is that they're the most medieval movies created. They have the atmosphere, the feel of the Middle Ages.
Yes.
Nearly every movie that you see on the Middle Ages is infested with modern thinking.
Yes.
People don't respect social class. There's always the feminist aspect. There's always the, oh, sure, I'm the Lord, but really I think everyone's equal to me.
There's you have people presented as mindless drones, and then you have the person coming in with modern kind of thinking, and it just throws these people off balance.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't like that.
And that's not what happens in Lord of the Rings. In
Yes.
Lord of the Rings, every character actually respects hierarchy.
Yes.
And they all have their rightful place. They all belong somewhere, and they have natural loyalties. And the thing that I really love is
When you
romance.
when you say natural loyalties, what you mean there are essentially racial loyalties.
That's right, blood.
Species loyalties.
Yeah,
Yes.
blood.
Yeah.
You know, even the orcs are loyal to the orcs.
Yes.
You know, the men of Gondor are loyal to Gondor.
Yeah.
And that's everyone is loyal to their own kind, and they ally together because there's a great threat.
Yes.
It's not just because, you know, it's multicultural time, all right? Although I must say, some people do get the wrong impression from the series, and they think that Tolkien would have loved multiculturalism, but there's absolutely no evidence to support that.
Yeah.
Now, as I was saying, one of the things that I love about The Lord of the Rings is the romance. And I've got my dictionary here, and it's got 4 definitions for romance. A story about love, a story about unusual or exciting adventures, the quality of adventure and idealized exploits found in such stories, and of course, a love affair. Now, I don't want to talk about the love. I want to talk about, although there is love in Lord of the Rings, it's a very romantic movie, but it's romance in every sense of the word. There is the story about just a classic love story, but there's also love of country,
Yes.
love of your own people, love of freedom, love of adventure, even love of duty.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
And how often do you see that? You know, usually duty is just despised. You know, you're a fool. You know.
Yeah. Well, it's like a lot of war movies made where the characters are literally. It seems that the whole point of the character is that they just want to survive the next battle so that they can get home, and war is bad, okay, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But this is like, no, we have an actual mission.
That's right. And these are not warlike people, but they've come to a point where they have to choose war.
Yes.
Choosing war is the only option that is really available to them.
Absolutely.
And that's true in life. Sometimes you get to a point where you just got to fight.
Yeah. I think Lord of the Rings has been so successful in the last couple of decades because it was a way of telling the story of our people. That's literally what it does. If you want to look for an actual like dead set example, the Battle of Minas Tirith tells the story of the Siege of Vienna in 1683. Yeah. In the Siege of Vienna, the Ottoman Turks had a massive army, over 100,000. They committed several massacres on the way over to Vienna. And they were besieging Vienna. A coalition of different countries came to Vienna's aid, led by the Polish King Jan Sobieski. The Polish cavalry, they were called the Winged Hussars. They had these just fabulous wings, feather wings attached to their horses. He led the largest cavalry charge in history against the Turkish army, and they also that routed them. They also hauled cannons up the muddy banks of these hills so that they could fire down onto the Ottomans, and they just routed the Ottoman army and saved Vienna. That battle just turned European history. If Vienna had been taken, Vienna was the heart of Europe. Vienna, like when we think of people like Mozart, Beethoven, Haydn, all the great composers, classical composers who we think of now, Vienna was central to their career. Vienna was central to European culture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So if that had been taken over by the Turks, basically Central Europe would have looked like Eastern Europe now.
Yeah. And also, militarily, Vienna was very important because Austria and its subject people, like the Hungarians, the Croats, they were Europe's defence against the Turks.
Yes.
So if they had fallen, then of course that task would have fallen to other people, and who knows how well they would have done.
Yeah, that's it. They were basically, and it was the other buffer country, Poland, that saved it. So I love it. It's amazing that like that movie was so popular because it's not a politically correct movie, but it's a way of telling the story of us, of Europeans, of white people, whatever you want to call us, without telling it explicitly. But it's one of those things that just touches people right in the core. Just to touch on a few other aspects of my favourite moments of Lord of the Rings, I love the depiction of the Shire at the start.
Yes.
It's very clearly England.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Not even Scotland, it's England.
Yes.
And then at the end, the scouring of the Shire, it takes us back to the last valley. Like the orcs make their way there eventually. The Shire is very insular, and they have the option of just staying there, staying away from all those battles far away. But if you don't fight, eventually the orcs are going to make their way there.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And I love the Battle of Helm's Deep. For me, like if I have to pick my favourite movie, I'll go with the second one, even though I think the Battle of Minas Tirith is amazing. And even though in the Two Towers they changed the nature of Faramir, I can bang on about that another time. I was pissed off about that, but the Battle of Helm's Deep, when you've got an army of several hundred people facing an army of 10,000 orcs, every time like when the orc army starts like just out of arrow range of the walls of Helm's Deep, every time I watch it, I'm one of the hobbits. and it's not until they charge out of the keep and on horseback, and Gandalf charges down the mountain with the Rohirrim on horseback that I can finally breathe. That's just one of the most amazing scenes of any movie that I've seen. Yeah.
I agree, it's great. And I think each movie is about 90%, maybe 95% accurate to the books.
Yeah.
There are definitely things that are taken out.
Yes.
So for example, in the first book, there's Tom Bombadil.
Oh, I was so upset they missed out Tom Bombadil.
And Tom Bombadil
yeah.
was taken out of the movie. And I think quite rightly, because in the book he doesn't actually serve any purpose. He's something that was written and Tolkien went, I like him, I'll keep him.
Okay. Yeah, I guess he would have been more
a more
suited
efficient editor would have got written.
He would have been more suited to the Hobbit, maybe.
Actually, you're quite right there. Yeah. And that's interesting because in the first book you can see the story progressing from, hey, this is a continuation of The Hobbit to this is an adult story.
Mind you, like I know we're tangenting here. Like it was one of Frodo's early challenges because, like in the book, that's where he in the Barrow Downs. That's where he finds Sting. Yeah. And Tom Bombadil comes and saves them from the ghosts and all that sort of stuff. So, the moment he walks out of the Shire, there are dangers. Yes. And Tom Bombadil is the first savior, and then Strider is the next. So, I loved the character of Tom Bombadil. I was upset they took him out. But they added all this dialogue in the movies, and I'm like, when the movie, like the full movie is is like nearly 4 hours long. And I'm like,
the extended edition is 4 hours.
Why would they cut stuff out but then put stuff in? Like, I didn't like that aspect.
Well, yeah, you're right. They have put things in, and it's. But even so, I think that there's only probably 2 scenes I've cut from each movie.
Okay.
You know that I would say, oh no, I didn't really. That could be taken out.
Cool.
You know, the vast majority of it is great.
Yes, absolutely.
And I think that the casting, which is so important, is fantastic. And there's things that they added to the story that isn't in the original. So the romance between Aragorn and Arwen, the elf, that is a sidebar. That's in the appendix.
Yes.
It's not part of the main story. But when you watch Lord of the Rings, it's actually a really great part of the story.
Yeah.
And it's hard to imagine taking that out.
Okay.
And the other thing that I love about it, and I guess all of these movies have this, is that they all have that element of tragedy.
Yes.
And I guess I don't like that happy ending, or everything has a happy ending. I don't like that. I like things to be a bit more, I don't know, is it darker? Is it nuanced? I'm not sure, but I want something more.
Well, it's not a completely happy ending.
No. I mean, most movies have happy endings.
Oh, yes.
And these movies don't necessarily have happy endings.
Well, no, yeah. There are 2 amazing lines in there. There's Gandalf when he's speaking to Frodo in the heart of Moriah, and they're talking about Gollum, and Frodo says, I wish Bilbo had killed him when he had the chance. And
yes.
Gandalf says, he basically says you don't have the right to make that decision. And he says, all you can do, I can't remember the words exactly, but is decide what you're going to do with the time that is given to you. That's a line that I remember on a regular basis, and it's one of the things that motivates me. And there's also another one, like if we're talking about the tragedy, like just the toll that a struggle takes on you. And there's a line right at the end, just as Frodo and Bilbo are about to hop on a ship to leave Middle Earth, and Gandalf says something along the lines of, you won't always be torn in two. One day you'll be whole again.
Yes.
Yeah. It's basically a recognition that like you don't live happily ever after, but eventually things will come back together.
Exactly. And I think that's true of most of our life sagas, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who's your favourite character in The Lord of the Rings?
Oh.
Now,
Sam.
Wow. Sam is my favourite too. Yeah. So you're the first person who's actually agreed with me.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it'd be a
most people have a completely different favourite character. Right. As if you ask 10 people, they'll have 10 different characters.
Right.
And I've always found that quite remarkable.
Oh, he's the Neville
when
Longbottom.
When I put my argument
Rings.
forward for Sam, everyone says, "Oh yeah, he's really important. He's really great."
It's the ultimate story arc. He's the lowest character who does the most important thing.
That's right.
Yeah.
But the secret of, because Sam is based on the Batman who served with Tolkien during the First World War.
Yeah.
And a Batman is basically a servant, a soldier who's a servant.
Yes. And
that means that the officer doesn't have to worry about looking after his uniform or cooking or whatever. He can actually do the leadership. And but he admired these men, you know, because they just put up with so much.
Yep.
And that's who Sam represents. He represents those ordinary soldiers, the Batman. And the thing about Sam is that he knows his place.
Yep.
He has a rightful place and he doesn't leave it. And he just does as good as he can in that place. And the only time where that is different is when Frodo is attacked by Shelob, the spider.
Yep.
And he's now left with, what do I do?
Yep.
And he takes the ring. And then he finds out where Frodo is and he rescues Frodo. And then Frodo says, give me the ring.
Yep. Yep.
And he struggles. He doesn't want to give the ring back. But he does.
He's the only character who freely gives away
He is the only character who freely gives up the ring.
Yeah.
Even though he knows that it is already taking control of him.
Yep.
But he hands it over, and that's actually a very heroic thing. To know your limitations and to live within your limitations. And then we get right to the end where they're at Mount Doom and Frodo can't go on anymore.
So he carries him.
And he says, I can't carry the ring, but I can carry you.
Yeah.
And he picks him up and he carries him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, they get into Mount Doom, and Frodo says,
It's mine.
it's mine. I'm not giving away the ring.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
mine. And Sam is like, oh no, this is a nightmare. And just as Gandalf predicted, Gollum inadvertently comes to the rescue. Not meaning to, of course. But you know, every part of Sam's journey is great. And of course he has his own great speech in Osgiliath, where Frodo is just beaten down, you know, mentally. He's like, you know, I can't really go on. And Sam tells him about all the stories that they heard when they were growing up, you know.
So you
And
like
those
that speech?
I love that speech.
Oh, right. Okay.
And he says, you know, I you know, those people in those stories, they had lots of opportunities to give up and they didn't. And he, you know, because they were holding out for something.
Okay.
And Frodo says, what are we holding out for? And Sam says that there's some good in this world and it's worth fighting for.
Yeah.
That's really inspirational.
Yeah, great. Yeah, absolutely. You're the first person I've met who actually likes that speech, because I didn't like it because it wasn't in the book, and I was, yeah. But absolutely, you're right. It still doesn't excuse changing the nature of Faramir.
No, Faramir was a mistake. I'll absolutely accept that.
Because actually, this is important. I think in the book, Faramir is he's actually the other character who freely gives away the ring.
That's right.
In that he lets Frodo go.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He aids him. He doesn't interfere with him at all.
Yeah.
Whereas in the movie, he takes him prisoner and.
Yeah. So in that respect, he's the equal of Sam. That's why I was so upset about the fact that in the movie they flipped it on its head.
Yeah.
Because it's not just he just made the other decision. It's like, no, you've basically undermined the whole philosophy of the whole book. But
Yeah. But having said that, you know, he still comes back, and he's still
He eventually turns around and makes the same decision.
Exactly. Yeah. Now we've gone way over time. I think that we should end it here.
Absolutely.
David, tell us where people can find more of your thinking.
Come to the xyz.net.au. I do live streams with Maddie's Modern Life on Monday nights and the Uncackables on Thursdays. And you can also check out some of my writing on the Pickering Post.
And I'm Mark Moncrief, and you can find more of my thinking at Upon Hope. Just type that into your favourite search engine and you'll be able to find me. Have a good day, David. Have a good day, everyone.